Clara sat at the kitchen table, her fingers nervously tracing the rim of her coffee cup. It was a quiet, early morning, the kind that felt almost too still. Aaron had already left for work. The house was empty except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the occasional sound of birds outside the window. She had always loved this time, when the world was still waking up, and everything seemed to pause for a moment. But today, it felt different. The stillness seemed more like a weight than a comfort. Her mind drifted, as it often did these days, to the distance between her and Aaron. It wasn't that they fought. No, not at all. They simply didn't talk. Conversations had become a blur of logistical discussions, quick exchanges about bills and schedules, but the intimacy they once shared had faded into nothingness. There was no spark, no laughter, no desire in their relationship anymore. Just quiet, polite coexistence. It felt like they were roommates, not lovers. Clara closed her eyes, trying to recall a time when they had been truly happy together. There was a time, she remembered, when Aaron's laughter filled the house. He would surprise her with small, spontaneous gestures, a kiss on the forehead, a hand held while they watched TV. But that was years ago. In its place, there was silence and routine. And then there was Gavin. She hadn't meant for it to happen. She hadn't even wanted it. But life, with its intricate web of emotions and desires, had a way of leading her down paths she never thought she'd tread. Gavin was different. He wasn't like Aaron. He was sharp, confident, and always seemed to know exactly what to say to make her feel seen. Not just as a wife or a mother, but as a woman. There was something magnetic about him, something that pulled at her in a way she couldn't explain. It had started innocently enough. He was her boss, after all, and they'd always maintained a professional distance. But then came the late-night emails, the flirty comments during meetings, the lingering looks. She could feel the shift between them, subtle at first, but undeniable once it became impossible to ignore. She told herself she wasn't interested, that it was just harmless banter, but the truth was, every word he spoke felt like a drop of water falling into a deep, empty well inside her. One evening, Gavin had asked her to stay late to discuss a project. The office was quiet, the kind of silence that only comes after hours when everyone else has gone home. She had agreed, of course. There was work to be done, after all. And when the last of the other employees had left, and the two of them were alone, the atmosphere shifted. Gavin's voice had dropped to a lower register, and his words lingered in the air like a promise. He complimented her, casually at first, then with more intensity. He noticed things about her, small details, the kind Aaron had stopped seeing. The way her hair caught the light, the quiet grace in the way she moved. He made her feel important, powerful, in a way that had been missing for so long. Clara had told herself it was just a fleeting moment, something that would pass. But when he leaned in, just a little too close, when his hand brushed hers, she didn't pull away. Instead, she froze, heart racing, breath catching in her throat. It was as if time itself had paused in that moment. The next thing she knew, they were kissing, soft at first, hesitant even, but then desperate, as if they both knew they were about to cross a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Clara had pulled back, shaking, her mind a whirlwind of confusion and guilt. But Gavin's touch had been electric, his presence undeniable. He whispered that it was okay, that this was normal. That sometimes, people needed things from others that they couldn't get from the ones they loved. And in that moment, Clara believed him. She told herself that it would end there, that it was a one-time thing, an accident. But as the days went on, Gavin's presence in her life grew more consuming. Each meeting, each casual glance, each word became a tether pulling her further away from the life she had with Aaron. She couldn't help it. He made her feel alive in a way she hadn't felt in years. He made her feel wanted, desirable, things she hadn't realized she missed until it was too late. But guilt gnawed at her, eating away at her from the inside. She tried to rationalize it. She wasn't looking for an affair. She wasn't trying to hurt Aaron. But somehow, the connection she had with Gavin felt too strong to ignore. The conversations they shared were easy, effortless. There was no pretending, no holding back. With him, she didn't have to be the perfect wife, the dutiful mother. She could just be Clara. Every time Aaron asked about her day, Clara's heart would sink. How could she tell him the truth? How could she explain what she had done, what she was still doing? She couldn't. The guilt was suffocating, but at the same time, there was a part of her that wanted more. She had convinced herself that she wasn't hurting anyone, that Aaron would never know, that the affair with Gavin was somehow just a blip, a temporary escape from the mundane reality of her life. But as time went on, the lines blurred. The affair deepened, and so did the emotional weight of what she was doing. She couldn't sleep, couldn't focus. Her body was tired, worn thin from the constant tug-of-war inside her. And all the while, Gavin was there, pushing her, pulling her, whispering in her ear that it was all worth it. She had become addicted to the rush of secrecy, to the forbidden nature of their encounters. It wasn't just about the physical attraction anymore. It was about feeling alive in a way that she hadn't in years. And with every passing day, it felt like she was slipping further and further away from Aaron, her husband, her partner in life. But it wasn't just about Gavin either. It was about Clara. About what she had become. She didn't recognize herself anymore. Every time she looked in the mirror, she saw someone different, someone she couldn't quite understand. Someone who had betrayed the very person who had stood by her through it all. And yet she couldn't stop. She couldn't find a way out. Not yet. As Clara sat there, her mind racing, the door to the house creaked open. Aaron was home earlier than usual. His footsteps echoed in the hallway, and Clara's heart skipped a beat. She quickly wiped away the tear that had slipped down her cheek and took a shaky breath. He walked into the kitchen, smiling as he set down his briefcase. But Clara saw it, saw the way his eyes searched her face, the way he hesitated before speaking. He knew something was off. She forced a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "A long day?" he asked, his voice soft, but there was an edge to it now. Clara nodded, her throat tight. She was already dreading the moment when he would ask the questions that had been lingering between them, the ones she couldn't answer. "Yeah," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Just tired." And so, the silence stretched between them once more, both of them pretending to be okay, even as everything was beginning to unravel beneath the surface. Clara's world seemed to shrink with each passing day. The quiet hum of her home, once a comfort, now felt like a constant reminder of the gap between her and Aaron. She had convinced herself that she was just going through a phase, that things would settle, that the guilt would fade. But it didn't. It only grew heavier, more suffocating, as her secret life with Gavin deepened. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. She wasn't supposed to fall into the trap of deceit, to blur the lines of loyalty and commitment. But every encounter with Gavin pulled her further down a path she wasn't sure she could escape. His touch, his attention, it was like nothing she had ever known. It wasn't just the thrill of an affair, it was the intensity, the power. Gavin knew how to make her feel invincible, seen, desired. With him, Clara wasn't just a wife, a mother. She was something more. They were careful at first. Small meetings, brief conversations, shared glances that only they understood. Clara tried to justify it, to tell herself that she wasn't truly betraying Aaron. She told herself that it was just a harmless escape, a way to feel alive again. But then the moments between her and Gavin grew longer. Their meetings turned into late-night rendezvous at a secluded cafe, a quiet corner where no one could see them, where they could speak freely without fear of judgment. Every time they were together, Clara felt something shift inside her. She had once prided herself on being a devoted wife, a good mother. But here, with Gavin, she was something else. She was wanted. She was desired. And that feeling, it was intoxicating. It was a drug she couldn't quit. Gavin was relentless in his pursuit, and Clara found herself slowly unraveling. His words, his touch, they consumed her. At first, there was the initial spark of excitement, of rebellion. But as they continued their affair, Clara's emotions became a tangled mess. She began to crave Gavin's presence, not just for the physical release, but for the emotional validation he gave her. It wasn't just about passion, it was about power. The power of control, of being seen as someone more than just a wife. And then, the inevitable happened. The signs appeared, subtle at first. A small ache, a twinge, nothing that could be explained away. But as the days wore on, Clara's body began to betray her. The pain grew more intense, and she found herself waking in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, her mind racing. But she ignored it. She pushed it aside, convinced that it was just stress, that her body was reacting to the strain of everything: Aaron's indifference, the affair with Gavin, the constant juggling act she was forced to maintain. It was only after a particularly intimate moment with Gavin that Clara realized something was terribly wrong. The discomfort she had been feeling grew unbearable, and that's when the cold wave of panic set in. She didn't want to believe it, didn't want to face what it meant. But deep down she knew. Her thoughts spiraled as she stared at the ceiling late one night, the sound of Aaron's even breathing beside her offering no comfort. How could she have let this happen? How could she have been so reckless, so selfish? She had been careful, hadn't she? She hadn't expected to lose control, to lose herself in this dangerous game. But that's exactly what had happened. And now, the consequences of her actions were catching up with her. The truth was undeniable. The infection was spreading, and the panic started to set in. She couldn't tell Aaron, she couldn't even admit to herself what had happened. She had crossed the line, and now the fallout was too great to ignore. But even in the midst of the fear, there was another part of her that refused to stop. There was a part of her that still craved Gavin's touch, his attention, even as everything else around her began to crumble. It was a strange kind of dissonance. On one hand, she hated herself for what she had done, what she was still doing. On the other, she couldn't bring herself to let go of Gavin. The more he pulled away from her, the more desperate she became. And the more desperate she became, the more willing she was to push the limits of what was acceptable. She was no longer just a wife, no longer just a mother. With Gavin, she had found a version of herself that was unfamiliar, one that was bold, unapologetic. She had let herself slip into a new identity, one that didn't care about the consequences. But now, as her body began to show the first signs of betrayal, she knew she had reached the point of no return. One afternoon, as Clara sat in her car, staring out the windshield, she replayed the conversation she'd had with Gavin. He had been so convincing, so persuasive. He told her that the affair was nothing to be ashamed of, that everyone deserved to feel alive, to feel desired. He assured her that it wasn't about hurting anyone. But that was a lie, wasn't it? She had always known it was a lie. She had lied to herself, to Aaron, and to Gavin. But now, with the weight of what she had done pressing down on her, Clara realized something she hadn't been able to admit before. She didn't just want Gavin anymore. She needed him. She was too far gone, tangled in a web of emotions she couldn't escape. The more she tried to deny it, the more she found herself drawn back to him. She reached for her phone, her hands trembling. She knew what she had to do. She had to see Gavin, to confront him. She needed answers. She needed to understand why she couldn't stop. But as she typed the message, her phone buzzed with a text from Aaron. "Where are you?" The words were innocent, but they felt like a weight. The question hung there, an accusation even though Aaron didn't know it. Clara hesitated, her thumb hovering over the screen. Should she lie? Should she tell him the truth? But the truth was something she couldn't face, not yet. She typed back, her heart pounding in her chest. "Just out running errands. I'll be home soon." She put the phone down, her breath shallow. The lies were building, one on top of the other. The guilt was unbearable. But as she started the car and drove away, heading toward Gavin's office, she knew she was no longer in control. She was on a path she couldn't turn back from. With each passing day, she found herself sinking deeper into this tangled web of lies and desire, her own body betraying her, as she slid further away from the life she had once known. And now, even as the consequences loomed, Clara couldn't help but feel the pull of it all, the power, the attraction, the forbidden allure of a life she wasn't supposed to want but couldn't resist. And as she parked outside Gavin's building, ready to face whatever came next, Clara realized that this was no longer about sex or desire. It was about something much darker, something she couldn't escape. The reckoning was coming, and she wasn't sure she was ready for it. But one thing was certain, it was too late to stop now. The confrontation came like a storm, sudden and violent. Clara wasn't prepared for it, couldn't have been. She had expected things to unravel slowly, to have time to justify, to explain. But Aaron wasn't giving her that luxury. He wasn't the man she had grown used to, the one who was calm, patient, almost passive in his quiet love. Now, the questions were sharp, cutting through the silence that had stretched between them for so long. It started with a simple question. "Aren't you going to tell me what's going on, Clara?" Aaron's voice was low, but the tension in his words was undeniable. His gaze was fixed on her, piercing, searching, as if he could see everything she had tried so hard to hide. Clara froze, her body stiffening. She didn't know how to answer him. The words that came to her were like poison in her throat, bitter and impossible to swallow. She had been expecting this, had known, deep down, that the day would come when Aaron would ask. But she wasn't ready. She didn't have the answers, didn't have the right words to make him understand, to make him forgive her. "Nothing's going on, Aaron," she said, her voice shaking, but she could hear the lie in it. He could hear it too. "Aren't you tired of pretending?" His voice broke through the silence, and for the first time in a long while, Clara saw the rawness in his eyes, the hurt, the disappointment, the anger that had been building inside him for so long. "I know you, Clara. I can see it in your eyes. You're not here with me anymore. You haven't been for months." Her stomach churned, and she felt the weight of her secret threatening to crush her. She had tried so hard to hold it all together, to protect him, to protect their family, but now everything was falling apart. The truth was unraveling, and no matter how much she tried to deny it, she couldn't stop it. "I don't know what you're talking about," she whispered, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. But even as she said them, she knew he didn't believe her. And why should he? She had been distant, distracted, avoiding him. He had seen the changes, felt the distance growing between them, but he hadn't known why. Until now. "I don't know why you're doing this," Aaron continued, his voice rising, his hands clenched at his sides. "But I'm not stupid, Clara. I know something's been going on. And I know it's not just this damn distance between us." Clara's heart pounded in her chest. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think, as her mind raced for a way to explain herself, to make this all go away. But there was no way to fix this now. There was no way to unring the bell. I don't know what you want me to say," she choked out, her voice breaking. Tears welled in her eyes, but she couldn't bring herself to cry. She couldn't let him see her weakness, not now, not when everything was collapsing around her. "I want the truth, Clara." "The truth," Aaron said, his voice cold, each word like a slap to her face. "Who is he?" Clara's world stopped. It was as if the earth itself had shifted beneath her feet. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected him to know so soon, to understand so quickly. But there it was, the accusation hanging in the air like a fog, thick and suffocating. Her body trembled, her hands shaking as she tried to find the words. She could feel the weight of the secret pressing on her chest, threatening to suffocate her. How could she tell him? How could she explain the unexplainable? The affair, the lies, the betrayal, it was too much. Too much for him to understand, too much for her to bear. And then there was the other part. The part that Clara hadn't been able to admit to herself, let alone to Aaron. The part that made her feel like she was sinking, drowning in her own guilt. The part that wanted Gavin more than anything. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. The truth was lodged in her throat, a painful knot that she couldn't untangle. She looked up at Aaron, her heart breaking at the sight of him. The man she had promised herself to, the man who had trusted her, who had loved her unconditionally. How had she let it all slip away? How had she let him down so completely? "I'm sorry," she whispered, the words feeling so small, so inadequate. I never meant for this to happen. Aaron's face twisted in disbelief. He stepped back, his eyes filled with confusion, anger, and something else, something much deeper. Never meant for what to happen, Clara? You've been lying to me for months. You've been hiding something from me, and you think an apology is going to fix it? Clara felt the sting of his words, and she wanted to argue, to tell him that she had never meant to hurt him. But there was no use. The damage was done. She couldn't form the words, couldn't explain how she had fallen into the trap, how she had let herself be taken by Gavin's charm, by the way he had made her feel special, alive. How had she let herself become this person, this woman who betrayed everything she once stood for? You're not even going to tell me his name, are you? Aaron's voice was cold now, hard. It was the first time she had ever heard him like this, and it sent a chill down her spine. I don't even recognize you anymore, Clara. Who are you? The truth hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Clara didn't know how to answer. She didn't know what to say to make it better. She could feel the divide growing between them, an unbridgeable gap that her words could never fix. I'm sorry, she repeated, her voice a mere whisper. I'm so sorry. But it wasn't enough. It could never be enough. Aaron turned away from her, his shoulders hunched in defeat. She could see the weight of the betrayal settling on him, a burden that he would carry for the rest of his life. I don't know if I can forgive you, Clara, he said, his voice barely audible. I don't know if I can ever trust you again. Clara watched as he walked away, each step pulling him further from her. She wanted to reach out, to beg him to stay, to fix everything, but she couldn't. The truth was too great, too painful to erase. And then, as if the weight of it all had finally broken her, Clara felt something shift inside her. Her chest tightened, and she suddenly gasped for air, a sharp pain tearing through her. It wasn't just the emotional weight of the confrontation. It was something more, something physical, something she had been avoiding for days. The sharp pain became unbearable, and she stumbled, clutching her stomach as she gasped for breath. The reality of her situation hit her like a ton of bricks. She had made this bed, and now she had to lie in it. Every choice, every moment, had led her to this point. As her body crumpled to the floor, she realized something that would haunt her for the rest of her life. This wasn't just the end of her marriage. It was the end of everything she thought she knew about herself. The hospital room was sterile, silent, save for the quiet beeping of machines and the soft rustle of the nurse's footsteps as she checked on Clara. It felt like a distant world, a place that didn't belong to her. But here she was, lying in a bed with an IV in her arm, the pain still gnawing at her insides, threatening to drown her. The physical pain was intense, but it was nothing compared to the weight of the emotional storm that had torn through her life in the last few days. She hadn't expected it to come to this, had never imagined that her actions would lead her here, to this cold, impersonal room. She had thought she could keep it under control, that the affair with Gavin would remain a secret, that she could live a double life without the consequences catching up to her. But that was before Aaron had confronted her, before the truth had come crashing down, before the diagnosis had come back with the reality of what she had done. The doctor had been kind but firm, delivering the news with a professionalism that made Clara feel like she was no longer human, just another patient. The infection she had contracted was serious, and while treatment had already begun, there was no way to undo the damage. She had risked everything, her health, her family, her marriage, for an affair that had brought nothing but destruction. And now Aaron was gone. Clara hadn't seen him since the confrontation. He hadn't come to the hospital, hadn't called. She hadn't expected him to. How could he, after everything she had done? She couldn't blame him, but the emptiness of his absence settled over her like a thick fog. She had ruined everything, and now she was paying the price. But it wasn't just Aaron she had to worry about. Gavin had been absent too. The one person she had allowed herself to be swept away by, the one who had made her feel alive, desirable, he had vanished. He hadn't called, hadn't checked on her. Clara felt a strange bitterness rise in her chest. For all the promises, All the moments they had shared, he had disappeared when it mattered the most. And that was the reality of it all. When the dust had settled, when everything had come crashing down, the only person who had been left standing was Clara, alone in a hospital bed, with nothing but her regrets. Her mind wandered back to that last encounter with Gavin, the last moment they had shared before the chaos had fully unraveled. It was a cold, crisp night when she had driven to his office, desperate to confront him, to understand what had happened, to see if there was any chance of salvaging something, anything, of the connection they had. She had needed answers, but when she arrived, she found the door locked, the lights out. Gavin had stopped responding to her calls and messages. He had ghosted her, just like that. Clara had felt humiliated, abandoned. It was as if she had been nothing more than a fleeting distraction for him, a brief escape from his own life. All the sweet words, all the promises, nothing had meant anything. She was just another casualty in his world, another nameless face that he could forget without consequence. But the hardest part was facing Aaron. The look in his eyes when he had confronted her, the hurt, the disbelief. It had crushed her in a way she hadn't expected. He had trusted her. He had loved her. And she had betrayed that trust in the worst possible way. She couldn't even begin to fathom the depths of the pain she had caused him. Now, lying here in the sterile silence of the hospital room, Clara had the space to finally confront the full weight of her choices. She had chosen Gavin over her husband, over her family, over herself. She had let herself become someone she didn't even recognize, someone driven by selfish desire, by the need to feel wanted and seen. And in doing so, she had thrown away everything that truly mattered. A soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts, and Clara turned to see the nurse entering, her expression gentle but professional. "How are you feeling today, Ms. Weston?" she asked, adjusting the foredrip. Clara didn't answer immediately. How could she? What words were there to express the whirlwind of emotions that had consumed her? She had no one to blame but herself. "I'm fine," she said finally, her voice hoarse. The nurse gave her a sympathetic smile, but said nothing more, taking a few moments to adjust the machines and make sure Clara was comfortable. As the nurse moved about the room, Clara's mind wandered back to Aaron. She had wanted to reach out to him, to apologize, to beg for forgiveness. But what was the point? He deserved so much more than her. He deserved someone who would love him fully, without hesitation or deceit. Someone who would stand by him, who wouldn't let him down when it mattered most. A wave of nausea washed over her as the thought crossed her mind. The physical symptoms of the infection were bad enough, but it was the emotional weight that threatened to crush her. Clara had never felt so alone, so disconnected from everything she had once believed in. The guilt gnawed at her relentlessly, and every time she closed her eyes, she saw Aaron's face, saw the hurt in his eyes. How had she let it all slip away? When the nurse left the room, Clara was left alone with her thoughts again. The room felt colder, emptier, without the hum of the machines and the soft shuffle of footsteps. It was in these moments of solitude that the truth sank in the hardest. There was no escape. No way to undo what had been done. She had lost Aaron. She had lost Gavin. She had lost herself. For so long, Clara had been living in a fog, convincing herself that she was still the person she used to be. The wife. The mother. The woman who could do no wrong. But that wasn't who she was anymore. Not after everything that had happened. After everything she had allowed herself to do. Clara closed her eyes, trying to block out the waves of pain and regret that washed over her. She had crossed the line, and now, there was no going back. She had hurt the people she loved, and there was no way to fix that. No apology, no explanation, no amount of tears could change what had already been done. But as she lay there, her chest tight with grief and loss, Clara realized something else. This wasn't just about the affair. It wasn't just about the pain she had caused. It was about the deeper truth, the truth that she had betrayed herself. In seeking validation from Gavin, in seeking attention and passion, she had lost sight of who she truly was. She had allowed herself to become someone she didn't recognize, someone she despised. And now, here she was, alone, broken, in a hospital room, with nothing but the echoes of her past mistakes. Clara knew she couldn't undo the damage. She couldn't take back the affair, the lies, the betrayal. But maybe, just maybe, this was the start of something else. A chance to rebuild. Not her marriage, not with Gavin, but with herself. She didn't know what that meant yet, or how it would look, but for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel completely empty. There was a flicker of hope, a glimmer of possibility that maybe, just maybe, she could find her way back from this. It wouldn't be easy. It wouldn't be quick. But Clara had nothing left to lose. She was broken, but she wasn't beyond repair. And for the first time in a long while, that thought was enough to keep her going.